Williams-Renault. For the first time since 1983, Williams cars are adorned with numbers 1 and 2, or they would be if Nigel Mansell was still around. Instead, the team will be using 0 and 2. Given his choice, Prost understandably chose 2, so Damon Hill, promoted from the testing role to the race drive, will be aiming to fulfill all the inevitable zero to hero headlines. The new car is the FW15C, already in C spec because it was originally intended to race in 1992, with the B a hasty conversion to 1993 regulations for testing, and the C the main effort. This is the first chassis fully designed by Adrian Newey and Patrick Head, and the first specifically designed for active suspension, with anti-lock brakes, the latest addition to the suite of tech enhancements, joining traction control, real-time telemetry, pneumatic engine valves, power steering and a semi-automatic gearbox that could be switched to full auto mode. The aero was cleaned up too, the FW14B having been a bit of a fudge after cramming so much extra kit in, and in the back is the latest evolution of the Renault V10 that has another 30 horsepower over last year's. Given how dominant the FW14B was, and how much of a technical advance the FW15C seems to be, it's difficult to imagine Williams being beaten in 1993. The only real question is behind the wheel, where Prost may be rusty after a year out, in which cars have developed greatly, while Hill is untried at this level. The team's livery now features heavy sponsorship from games console manufacturer Sega, whose signature character Sonic the Hedgehog was all over the team's publicity, including a pair of cartoon legs and a cutaway on the nose. Car 0, Damon Hill. At 33, Hill is quite old to be starting his career in a top team, and critics note that he's never won a single junior Formula title. He didn't set the world alight at Brabham in 1992 either. The equipment wasn't up to much, sure, but he was also outqualified by Eric van der Poel 6-2. Obviously there's a certain amount of sentimental support for the son of the great Graham Hill, and a lot of Mansell fans are sure to latch onto him as a replacement for their hero, but it seems clear that he will be expected to be a dutiful understudy to Alain Prost and not challenge the French champion, something that might not have happened with Martin Brundle or Mika Hakkinen in the seat. Car 2, Alain Prost. Assuming that the whole business of Prost's super licence is cleared up before he arrives in Kyalami, Prost will start the season as the huge favourite to be crowned 1993 World Champion, with the main talking point being whether he can go better than Mansell and win 10 or more races this year. He's been training hard to get back into physical shape over the winter, and testing extensively to make sure he's up to speed with the technical advantages since he sat in the 1991 Ferrari. In little danger of being outshone by his teammate, and with a reported horsepower advantage of a colossal 80 to 100 over the Ford HBs and the McLarens and Benettons, nobody expects 1993 to be anything but a cruise to a fourth world title. Tyrrell-Yamaha. Tyrrell begin the year with a new look, the red of new sponsor cabin added to the traditional navy and white, and a new engine, the Judd-built Yamaha V10, but the 1991 vintage 020 chassis entered its third season, with its third power plant, until such time as Mike Coughlin's new 021 is ready. Yamaha have been something of an albatross during their history in Formula One, with Zach Speed, Brabham and now Jordan all having quickly regretted signing up with the Japanese giants, but Ken Tyrrell and son Bob, now doing much of the day-to-day work, have cause for optimism as John Judd has a track record of building a decent motor. Behind the wheel are Ukyo Katayama, who often looked a little bit out of his depth in the Larrousse last year but didn't completely blot his copybook, and Andrea De Cesaris, who's developed into a decent driver of late. Nobody expects miracles this year, but there's cause for optimism in Ockham. Car number 3, Ukyo Katayama. Having raced almost exclusively at home in Japan, Katayama was handicapped by not knowing most of the circuits he was driving at in 1992, and his diminutive frame meant he often tired on the more physically demanding circuits. That said, despite a couple of spins, he never disgraced himself, and it was mostly the car letting him down rather than the other way round. He's mostly in F1 and at Tyrrell as a mobile billboard for cabin cigarettes, but he seems a personable young man, and there have been plenty less talented drivers making decent careers for themselves over the years. Car number 4, Andrea De Cesaris. Up until a couple of years ago, De Cesaris was the poster boy for the quintessential pay driver with more money than talent and a more influential family than your average Borgia. In reality, he'd settled down since his early wild days some years ago, but it took Eddie Jordan's patient work with him in 1991 to really bring out his talent. He's still not a world beater, and at 34 is unlikely to improve much more, but he demolished Olivier Gouillard last year, and it's not just his Marlboro money that's kept him at Tyrrell. Indeed, neither the 1992 nor 93 liveries for the 020 feature Marlboro branding at all. Benetton-Ford. The Benetton B192 proved almost bulletproof in 1992, scoring points in every race, including 11 podiums, one of which was a win. The team spent the year fighting with McLaren for second place overall, which they just missed out on, but it was clear that they were a team rising as McLaren declined, and 1993 should be the year they supplant them. But while last year's car was a fairly low-tech affair, and despite Briatore's protestations about wanting to lower costs and ban driver aids, the B193 features active suspension, traction control and a semi-automatic gearbox, all in a smoother aerodynamic package with the signature shark nose, and with a further more powerful development of the Ford HB V8 in the back. Despite being underpowered relative to the Renault and Honda in 1992, the little HB proved to deliver a lot of bang for its buck. The young but very quick Michael Schumacher is now partnered with veteran Riccardo Patrese, a not uncontroversial decision. Car number 5, Michael Schumacher. When he first came into F1 with Jordan at the Belgian Grand Prix of 1991, it was clear that Schumacher had talent, which was backed up by his performances against Nelson Piquet for the rest of the season. 1992 really underlined that Schumacher was the real deal, with a win on the anniversary of his debut putting the ideal finishing touch on it, and beating Senna in the drivers' standings the cherry on top. Much is expected of the young German in 1993 when, in the absence of Senna, or at least in the expectation of the McLaren team struggling, he is primed to lead the opposition to Alain Prost. Car number 6, Riccardo Patrese. Ironically, moving teams has kept Patrese in the number 6 car as he joins his 6th team, 7th if you count 2 stints at Brabham, on the eve of his 240th Grand Prix. At 39 he might be considering retirement, but he showed in 1991 that he still had the speed and competitive spirit to take the fight to his much-vaunted teammate Mansell, and if 1992 was less successful and more demoralising, it wasn't because the old man had lost a step. Many F1 fans, particularly the British of course, were critical of Benetton's decision to release Brundle, and they will probably be unwilling to give Patrese a fair shot, but the Italian will be keen to show that he's good value for it. McLaren-Ford. 1992 was something of a disaster for McLaren in more ways than one. The team might have still held on to second place in the Constructors' Championship, but was some distance off the pace of the leading Williamses, and with the loss of the Honda engine deal and the failure to find a replacement works contract, 1993 looks like it might be even more difficult. Officially, the team's 2 drivers for 1993 are 1991 kart champion Michael Andretti and Mika Hakkinen, but the Finn's chances of racing are entirely down to what Ayrton Senna decides to do. After all, Ron Dennis didn't bring over the US star just to relegate him to testing duties. Neil Oatley's MP4-8 is the car Senna will decide whether or not to drive, and like the Benetton features a full suite of electronic driver aids not present on its predecessor, active suspension, traction control, and a semi-automatic gearbox which, like the Williams one, could be switched to fully automatic. In the back is the customer version of the Ford HB, the Evolution 7, debuted by Benetton at Imola last year, and now replaced in Briatore's car by the Evolution 8. Car number 7, Michael Andretti. Born in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania in 1962, Michael Andretti comes from racing royalty. His father Mario, 4 times IndyCar champion and 1978 Formula One champion of course, but Michael brothers Jeff, his uncle Aldo and cousin John all have racing careers, though cut short by injury in Aldo's case. Michael's own career began with Formula Ford, then Formula Super V and Formula Atlantic, before making his kart debut in 1983, sharing Rookie of the Year at Indianapolis that year with Roberto Guerrero. He won his first race at Long Beach in 1986 and fought for the championship with Bobby Rahal that year, coming a close second. 1987 was more of the same, but 1988 was a disaster, with Andretti only taking 1 win in the Marlboro Challenge later in the year, as he trailed in 6th overall. A switch from the Krakow team to Paul Newman and Carl Haas's outfit for 1989 brought steady improvement. 3rd overall that year, 2nd in 1990, and then in 1991 he finally won, beating his old rival Rahal into 2nd place, while his brother Jeff won the Rookie of the Year award for the season. 1992 saw the tables turn once again with Rahal champion and Andretti 2nd, but Michael was already eyeing up a potential move to Formula One, the series in which his father had excelled. Talks with Ron Dennis, who among other things was trying to woo Ford and keen to find a top-class replacement for Ayrton Senna, led to tests, and tests led to a contract. Nobody can doubt Andretti's credentials, but F1 and kart are very different beasts, much more so than in Mario's day, and there are questions about how well the skill set will translate. Car number 8, Mika Hakkinen. The young Finn has impressed in his 2 years at Lotus, and he was the subject of many rumours late in 1992 about his possible destination, with Williams and McLaren both apparently vying for his signature. As Ivan Capelli found out last year, of course, moving from a small team to a big successful one can be a double-edged sword, and he may well not even get to race if Senna does drive. In that case, he will have to hope that a season as test driver for McLaren doesn't take the momentum out of a promising career, and that if he does drive, he can live up to the hype. Footwork-Mugen Honda. After a pretty rough start in 1990 and 91, Wataru Uhashi's investment is starting to look like it's coming good, with a decent showing for the Footwork team in 1992, and one that could have been even better but for a bit of luck. The Mugen Honda V12 is based on the units raced by McLaren in 1989-90 and Tyrrell in 91, and while the basic block is getting on now, it seems to pack plenty of grunt. Mugen have upgraded the engine once again, and a new FA14 chassis is on the way once the season reaches Europe. The new car will be the first with a semi-automatic gearbox, but in the meantime the fully manual FA13 has been updated to 1993 regulations. Team old boy Derek Warwick returns after several successful years in sports cars to partner Aguri Suzuki. Car 9, Derek Warwick. Making his F1 debut all the way back in 1981 with the Tolman team, which later evolved into Benetton, Warwick impressed enough to be given a seat at the Renault Works team in 1984 after Alain Prost's acrimonious departure. Unfortunately, Renault were on a downward spiral from then, and despite coming close on several occasions, Warwick never quite managed to win a race. The rest of his career in F1 was characterised by so many missed opportunities, both of his own making and others, turning down the Williams drive in 1985, then being vetoed out of the 1986 Lotus seat by Senna, for example. In 1986 he moved to sports cars, coming third in the championship for Tom Walkinshaw's Jaguar team, while also substituting for the late Elio De Angelis at Brabham. After a disastrous 1990 season at Lotus, it was back to Walkinshaw's Jaguar team again, coming second to his old Tolman teammate Teo Fabi in 1991, and then switching for 1992 to Peugeot, the only major manufacturer still contesting the dying series. He won the title, which he shared with his co-driver Yannick Dalmas, but was left once again without a drive as the World Sports Car Championship imploded. Warwick was then contacted by his old boss Jackie Oliver, for whom he'd driven for 3 relatively unsuccessful years between 1987 and 89. Car number 10, Aguri Suzuki. Suzuki had somewhat disappointed on track in 1992, and indeed hasn't scored a point since Phoenix 1991, but the Japanese enthusiasm for Formula One means he remains a superstar at home and is very well supported financially, as well as being a cheerful and easygoing chap, easy to get on with in the team, and very sponsor-friendly. He does still have some way to go to convince everyone that his historic podium at Suzuka in 1990 was more than just a fluke good day. That said, he does tend to do well there. He notably dominated Alboreto there last year, the only time all year he really looked even remotely comparable to the experienced Italian. Lotus-Ford. After nearly going under at the end of 1990, Lotus have been gradually working their way back to competitiveness. 1991 saw steady improvement, but still a struggle, but once the new 107 chassis arrived partway through 92, the improvement was marked as the two talented drivers, Hakkinen and Herbert, started to regularly qualify in the top 10 and finish in the points, even fighting for podium places. Reliability remained a problem though. Johnny Herbert in particular was absolutely plagued by mechanical issues, and that is something the team will be looking to fix in 1993. They will continue with the 107 chassis, now the 107B, and an increased sponsorship commitment from Castrol has seen the car's livery change to reflect their corporate colours of green, white and red, which neatly allows the cars to remain in the classic British racing green. With Hakkinen having moved on to McLaren, promising Italian Alessandro Zanardi finally gets his first regular F1 drive. Car number 11, Alessandro Zanardi. After an impressive 1991 F3000 campaign, Zanardi made his F1 debut for Jordan, but was unable to parlay his couple of appearances into a full-time drive for 92. All was not lost, however, as he was employed as a test driver for Benetton and played a large part in the development of this year's B193 chassis, as well as getting a little more experience in the Minardi, substituting for Christian Fittipaldi, though he only managed to qualify the underpowered car once in his 3 attempts. Nonetheless, he is widely regarded as a potential future star and will hope to prove his credentials at a Lotus team who seem to be on the up. Car 12, Johnny Herbert. Believe it or not, 1992 was Johnny's first full season in F1, and it wasn't a particularly happy one. Race after race he put in a great combative performance, only for his car to break or get involved in some midfield schmozzle that sent him out or trailing in for repairs. The championship table showed Herbert outscored 10-1 by his teammate Häkkinen, but that in no way reflected his relative talent and speed, and despite sticking with his number 12 second car, will be hoping to assert himself as the team leader against his less experienced teammate in 1993. If he can just finish. Jordan-Hart. 1992 was a very tough sophomore year for Jordan, as a lot of the decisions made to enable a successful 1991 came back to bite the team, primarily their inability to pay the bill for their Ford engines, which meant they were forced to accept the free supply of Yamaha V12s that turned out to be such a millstone round their neck. The new Jordan 193 chassis looks different to its predecessor, especially with the more conventional straight-edge front wing, and under the skin there is traction control software in addition to the semi-automatic gearbox carried over from last year. The engine itself is a brand new one, a V10 by Brian Hart's firm, which had built turbo engines in the early 80s for Tolman, Ram, Spirit and Haas Lola, but feeling that the big manufacturers could throw more resources at the problem than he could, Brian Hart returned to his original business of tuning, massaging the Ford V8s for Arrows, Tyrrell, Larrousse and AGS during 1990 and 91. This new Model 1035 engine is a new venture for Hart and a bit of a risk for Jordan, but Brian knows his engines and anything is better than last year. With both of 1992's drivers moving on, to kart in the case of Gugelmin and Italian Superturismo in the case of Modena, Eddie Jordan gives an F1 debut to promising Brazilian Rubens Barrichello and is given the second seat to Ivan Capelli as he looks to rebuild his career after his disastrous year at Ferrari. Car 14, Rubens Barrichello. Of Brazilian-Italian heritage, young Rubens got into karting at a young age, and by 18 had 5 karting titles, and, like so many Brazilians, followed in the footsteps of Fittipaldi and Senna by moving to the UK in search of the next step. Winning the Formula Vauxhall Lotus Series at the first attempt in 1990, he repeated the same trick in 1991 in F3. Moving straight up into F3000, he replaced Alessandro Zanardi at the Il Barone Rampanti team, who were at the time rumoured to be looking at an F1 entry as a Benetton B team. In the event, he finished third in the F3000 series behind his teammate Andrea Montemini and Luca Badoer. His rise has been pretty meteoric, and he makes his F1 debut in South Africa at the age of just 20. Clearly a talented young man, but some question if he's risen through the ranks too fast and needs a little bit more experience before joining the big leagues. Car 15, Ivan Capelli. If you looked up A Dream That Turned Into a Nightmare in an encyclopedia, you might well find a picture of Ivan Capelli in Ferrari overalls grinning and giving a thumbs up to the camera. The F92A he was given to drive was pretty awful, but just as bad in many ways was the intense political atmosphere and media scrutiny that was a far cry from his previous career with the small friendly Leighton House March team. There he had been personal friends with the owner and in the end a shareholder too, while at Ferrari it was made very clear from day one that he was a disposable asset. Jordan are well known in the paddock as a fun-loving team, though 1992 must have strained their good humour, and perhaps more importantly for Ivan, their commercial manager is Ian Phillips, former team manager at Leighton House, who put in a good word for him. March-Ilmor. Capelli's old team struggle on despite an almost total lack of funding, spending the winter updating their car once more. The CG911, originally designed in the winter of 1990, is now the CG911C, and also looking for funding, investment or a buyer. A promising-sounding partnership with an Italian firm called Tamoil, who apparently wanted to enter F1 as a constructor eventually, turned out to be a mafia scam. Then a Swiss firm called Lysis offered to broker a deal with a rich Saudi to buy the team outright, only for it all to collapse when the Saudi balked at the frankly ridiculous commission Lysis wanted on the deal. Nonetheless, as the date of the South African Grand Prix approached, and with the new car having yet to turn a wheel, March are signed up for the season with Jan Lammers and well-sponsored Frenchman Jean-Marc Gounon in the cockpit, the latter apparently bringing $1 million to the team for the first few races. Car 16, Jan Lammers. Jan had not embarrassed himself on his return to F1 after a decade away. Qualifying decently in Japan, his clutch gave way, while in Australia he had a worse qualifying performance but plugged away to finish 12th, albeit second last and 3 laps down. He was keen to stress to reporters that he didn't regard his return to F1 in '92 as a bit of nostalgia or a favour from a friend, but as the start of a second career in the category with all the experience of his decade at the pinnacle of sports car racing behind him. He seems serious about it and brings a certain amount of Dutch financial backing as the country's sole representative in the sport. Car 17, Jean-Marc Gounon. Gounon got his racing start, like many other French youngsters, in Formule-Renault and finished runner-up to Eric Comas in his second season, 1986. Runner-up again in 1987, he moved into F3, but again found himself up against an informed Comas who dominated the 1988 season. The stars aligned in '89 though, and he waltzed off with the title after winning 5 races in a row for the Oreca team. Picked up for F3000 by Mansell Madgwick Racing, he had a tough debut season but managed a 3rd place at Hockenheim on his way to 9th overall. For 1991 he moved to Onyx founder Mike Earle's 3001 International team, but their Ralt chassis wasn't as competitive as the Reynards, though Gounon did become the only driver to win in a non-Reynard all year. 1992 saw another move to Dams, but a run of retirement scuppered his season and he could only manage 7th overall. He had tested for the Larrousse team over the winter, but his promised lavish sponsorship brought him in the end to March. Larrousse-Lamborghini. Entering their 7th year of F1, the Larrousse team are finally constructors in their own right, with a new LH93 designed by Robin Herd and Michel Tetu around the basis of last year's Venturi badged chassis. Part of the reason for the team taking the plunge was the prospect of Peugeot entering the sport as an engine supplier, and Gerard Larrousse felt the team would be more attractive to them as a constructor. For the time being, though, the team continued with the increasingly venerable Lamborghini 3512, which at least had benefited from some upgrades toward the end of 1992, which had improved its performance greatly. All change in the cockpit, though, as Eric Comas begins life after Ligier, and team old boy Philippe Alliot returns to F1 after 2 years out, with Larrousse hoping that his history with Peugeot sports cars will help their cause. Car 19, Philippe Alliot. Alliot made his F1 debut in 1984 for the Ram team, but after just 4 finishes in 2 years, with 9th his best result, he seemed to be on the F1 scrap heap until hired in 1986 to replace the injured Jacques Lafitte at Ligier. His first point came at the penultimate race in Mexico, and he was taken on by Gerard Larrousse for his new team when it launched in 1987. 3 more points finishes, all for 6th place, came that year, but his 3 years with the team were dogged by a combination of reliability problems and an unfortunate tendency to crash, and only produced 1 further point for 6th in Spain in 1989. Returning to Ligier for 1990, he was mostly outperformed by his teammate Nicola Larini, though neither driver scored in the year-old JS33B. With no offers from F1 on the table, Alliot returned to sports cars, which he'd driven before F1, and won his debut race for Peugeot, co-driving with Mauro Baldi on their way to joint 3rd in the championship. The pair stayed with Peugeot for 1992 and again finished joint runners-up, this time to their teammates Warwick and Dalmas, who shared the title. Car number 20, Eric Comas. Comas had done about as well as might be expected in the Ligier team in 1991 and 92, enduring a pretty dismal debut year and an improved but still demoralising second year. He seemed to mostly outshine his more experienced teammate Boutsen, which didn't entirely help the relationship between the two men, and indeed Guy Ligier himself, as the three had all decisively fallen out by the end of 1992. With Ligier selling up and the new owners wanting a new broom, Comas and Boutsen were both out, and Larrousse took the chance of hiring a driver with real prospects instead of just another pay driver. Eric, for his part, will be keen to enjoy a change of scenery and hope for better relationships with team and teammate. Lola BMS Scuderia Italia Ferrari. All change at Team Italy, who ditched their 5-year partnership with Dallara following year after year of disappointing results, switching instead to the experienced Lola firm. The T9330 is built around the Ferrari engine retained from 1992 and features a semi-automatic gearbox, but is otherwise a fully conventional car. There's a new livery too, sponsorship from Chesterfield cigarettes coming with an eye-catching, or eye-watering depending on your taste, red and white livery with yellow zigzags, and 2 new drivers, the classic mix of youth and experience, with veteran Michele Alboreto joining F3000 champion Luca Badoer. Early tests at Estoril weren't promising, but it's early days as yet, and the team will hope to develop as the season progresses, especially as they've been promised access to Ferrari's traction control system. Car 21, Michele Alboreto. Entering his 13th year of F1 at the age of 36, Alboreto must be thinking of winding down his long career as he joins team number 6, and certainly the glory days of battling for the 1985 title with Alain Prost seem a long time ago now. All of that said, he had a pretty good 1992, and it would have been even better if he'd had the rub of the green and translated some of that ridiculous number of 7th places into points. Like Riccardo Patrese, there's life in the old dog yet, and hopefully his vast experience will help young Badoer adjust to life in F1. Car 22, Luca Badoer. Starting his racing career in karting in 1985, Luca took the Venice region title in 1986 and the national title the year after, before moving into F3 for 1990. 10th in his first year, he did much better in 1991, only to lose 3 of his 4 wins in a row after being disqualified for tyre irregularities. Nonetheless, a 4th place finish overall got him selected by the Krypton team for their 1992 F3000 season, and after a slow start he benefited from the team's radical new suspension to win the next 2 races, and had another 2nd place and 1 more win at Nogaro to give him the F3000 title at the first attempt, and an F1 contract with Scuderia Italia. You have to suspect that a team in transition isn't possibly going to be the best place to showcase his talents, but he'll hope to learn a lot from the experience. Minardi-Ford. With Lamborghini withdrawing from Minardi to concentrate on Larrousse, the new Minardi M193 has been designed by Gustav Brunner and Aldo Costa to take the much smaller Ford HB, and like most of the other smaller teams, a semi-automatic gearbox is the limit of the electronic gizmos in this neat little chassis. Gone too is Minardi's traditional black colour scheme, the car now all white with some black and yellow lining, apparently added at the suggestion of Giancarlo Minardi's wife to break it up a bit. Retained on driving duties is Christian Fittipaldi, joined by ex-AGS driver Fabrizio Barbazza, whose personal sponsor Beta Tools have also come on board as a main team sponsor. After only scoring 1 point in 1992, Minardi will be hoping 1993 brings better fortune. Car 23, Christian Fittipaldi. A fairly encouraging first season for Fittipaldi, who stacked up well against Gianni Morbidelli and was the one to score the team's only point of the year, even after breaking his neck in an accident. He struggled a bit coming back from that, but he doesn't seem to have let it get into his head, and after a winter spent resting and testing, he'll be keen to get cracking in his new role as team leader. Car 24, Fabrizio Barbazza. Having come into F1 via the unusual route of kart racing, Barbazza was brought into the AGS team when it was bought by his old F3000 boss Patrizio Cantu, only to have an awful season in an awful car and fail to qualify for a single race. So for 1992 he returned to kart with his old Arciero racing team. He scored just 1 point in his first 3 races, for 12th in the season opener at Surfers Paradise. Then at Indianapolis he failed to qualify his Arciero, signed up for the Euro Motorsport team and failed to qualify that too, while the other Euro Motorsport driver, Jovi Marcello, was killed. After that, Barbazza found himself out of a drive and spent the rest of the year raising sponsorship to see if he could get back into F1. When Gianni Morbidelli's sponsorship ran out, and with Pierluigi Martini willing to return but under a bit of a cloud after defecting to the competition, Barbazza got his chance. Ligier-Renault. All changed too at Ligier, where Guy Ligier finally gave up the unequal struggle at the end of 1992 and sold the team to former AGS owner Cyril de Rouvre for an estimated 200 million francs. Not a bad nest egg for a comfortable retirement. Internally, de Rouvre decided not to rock the boat, with Danny Hindenhoff as sporting director and Gerard Ducarouge in charge of the technical side, while also bringing in Lotus's head of R&D, John Davis. The resulting JS39 is an evolution of last year's JS37, which was just starting to come good at the end of the season, and still mounts the same Renault V10 as Williams, with traction control, and the team have also bought some Williams gearboxes, while the in-house Ligier semi-automatic is readied. So far so good, but Cyril has outraged patriotic French fans by hiring 2 British drivers. Martin Brundle and Mark Blundell reunite, to the horror of commentators everywhere. An ambitious de Rouvre reckons the team will score 30 points this year. Car 25, Martin Brundle. After a good season with Benetton, Martin found himself shuffled out of his first ever truly competitive drive thanks more to internal politics than his own abilities, and despite being linked with Williams, he found himself instead looking around for whatever he could get. Having spent much of his career in frustratingly slow cars, Brundle will hope that Cyril de Rouvre's ambitions are not just pie in the sky, and that he can at the very least keep his name in the shop window for another top team. Car 26, Mark Blundell. Mark's debut season with Brabham in 1991 was about as good as could be expected with the team circling the drain, and he scored his first point in Belgium while qualifying for every race bar 2. Unable to finance a race drive in 1992, he was thrown a lifeline by Ron Dennis, who offered him a testing berth, and he was also hired by Jean Todt to co-drive the Peugeot at Le Mans, along with Derek Warwick and Yannick Dalmas, who were on their way to the sports car title. The trio won that race at Le Mans, and it was a great boost to Blundell, who'd been the youngest man ever to take pole at the 1990 event by a whopping 6 seconds, only for his Nissan's gearbox to expire in the early hours during Julian Bailey's stint. As a Le Mans winner and McLaren driver, he then found it a little bit easier to get funding for another race seat in F1. Ferrari. In bringing John Barnard back to Ferrari, Luca di Montezemolo has his eye on the future rather than an immediate return to form in '93. Barnard is concentrating on the 1994 car, in fact, while his deputy George Wrighton has been the one working on the F93A, an update to the F92A rather than a new car, but one which abandons the twin floor concept and concentrates on fixing the problem with the chassis, aerodynamics, rigidity, weight distribution, and also includes traction control and a new power-assisted suspension system. Not the troublesome one tested by Larini at Suzuka and Adelaide, but a whole new system. In the back, though, Ferrari remain wedded to the big V12, which now has pneumatic distribution in an effort to improve its pickup. Purists are offended, though, by the addition of a broad white stripe, which is intended to hark back to the glory days of Niki Lauda, but does rather make the car look like the Dalaras of the last few years, not a flattering comparison. Gerhard Berger returns to the team after 3 years at McLaren to partner Jean Alesi. Car 27, Jean Alesi. Now entering the 3rd and last year of his Ferrari contract, the undoubtedly talented Alesi will be desperate to finally get that elusive first win under his belt and end Ferrari's 2-year drought in the process. He might be looking over at Williams and wondering if he made the right decision after all to walk away from negotiations towards the end of 1990, but he's not lost any of his desire and often seemed to drag the F92A around the track by sheer force of will. The arrival of Berger will certainly prove a bigger challenge than the ill-fated Capelli, but it will be interesting to see how the teammate relationship develops given the number of times the two have clashed on track over the last couple of years. Car 28, Gerhard Berger. Genial and good-humoured he may have been, but his first 2 years with McLaren were deeply frustrating for the Austrian. 1992 was better, with 2 wins on merit, compared to 1 gifted by Senna at the last corner in the previous 2 years. And finishing just a point behind his illustrious teammate helped. He seemed to have been so plagued with unreliability ever since his awful 1989 season with Ferrari that some have suggested he lacks some sympathy for the high-tech current generation of F1 cars. He'll be keen to prove that wrong and continue the good run of form on which he left McLaren after winning the last race in '92. Sauber. Late in 1991, the legendary Mercedes firm decided to make a return to F1, decades after withdrawing from the series following the catastrophe at Le Mans in 1955. After a long and successful association with sports car builder Peter Sauber, the original plan was that Sauber would enter F1 as the advance guard, before Mercedes themselves bought the F1 team as a factory entry after a couple of years. Some of the stepping stones were put in place. Sauber Mercedes driver Karl Wendlinger spent late 91 and most of 92 gaining race experience in the March team, powered by an Ilmor engine, part owned and developed by Mercedes. But in November 1992, head office decided that they didn't want to get back into F1 after all, preferring instead, like Honda, to refocus on economically and environmentally friendly technology. But they didn't leave Peter Sauber entirely high and dry, financing the Swiss team to the tune of 35 million Deutschmarks and putting Concept by Mercedes-Benz on the airbox, but the Ilmor engine is rebadged as a Sauber V10 for the season. The all-black C12 chassis designed by Harvey Postlethwaite has looked good in testing and will be driven by Wendlinger and JJ Leto, while team manager Carmen Ziegler is one of the first women to take a senior role in an F1 team. Car 29, Karl Wendlinger. In sports car racing, Wendlinger had often been thought of as the equal of, or even superior to, Michael Schumacher. However, the pair's fortunes in F1 had been different since they both debuted in 1991. While Schumacher impressed in a Jordan, then moved straight into a race-winning team, Wendlinger doggedly plugged away in a March team suffering a dire financial shortfall, putting in great performances, usually out of the view of the cameras. He certainly gained some valuable experience in the process, though, and now returns to the Sauber fold ready to spearhead their assault on F1. If the team do as well as their potential suggests, this could be the start of big things for Karl. Car 30, JJ Leto. Like Wendlinger, Leto was highly rated, but has only managed to accumulate frustration in a series of uncompetitive cars, with 1992 a particular low point. A year on from taking his and Scuderia Italia's first podium, he failed to score a single point all year, while his countryman Mika Häkkinen wowed the paddock and ended up with Williams and McLaren both vying for his signature. Leto goes to Sauber in need of a kick-start to his career and will hope to put up a good showing against the team's favourite child Wendlinger as a minimum. He celebrates his new start by replacing the blue top to his helmet with a neon green and yellow leaf design.